What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, May 19th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 9-game MLB slate for right now. Pretty good chance it looks like that this turns into an 8-game slate. Some chance that it turns into a 7-game slate. I'll touch on the weather as we go through, but it looks right now like there's a pretty good chance that we're going to completely lose the Cleveland and Minnesota game. And then we have weather concerns in St. Louis as well that we need to keep an eye on. So again, I'll touch on that more. But for the sake of this show, I did go ahead and include the Cleveland Minnesota game and the Detroit St. Louis game, just for the purposes of talking through them and seeing what looks good. But if the slate were to actually start right now, I would have completely excluded the Minnesota game and probably the hitters from the St. Louis game. Again, that's one that we'll have to keep an eye on. But yeah, so player exposures here, as usual. I'll go through what I would have if the slate started right now. But even more so than usual, go ahead and take those with a grain of salt because very good chance that one of these games ends up not even playing. As a reminder, you can use the Run the Sims projections that you see on the screen. Sign up using the link in the description below. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, use promo code UDAMLB. You get 10% off of your first month. That is available through May 31st. So get on that. You get the fully detailed projections you see on the screen, or we do also have the overlay package, which is just the projection overlay that goes onto the DraftKings lineup page. So if you're somebody that builds by hand, only plays a few lineups, doesn't need the fully detailed downloadable projections, you can get that. It is only $10 a month. So check that out. Really, regardless of what you play, there should be a package that fits your needs, and you can use that promo code to get 10% off. Now, starting with Houston taking on Tampa Bay. Also, if my audio sounds shitty, let me know because I might have screwed up my mic and I have no way of telling. But hopefully it sounds okay. If it does sound worse than usual, though, let me know and I'll see if I can fix it. Starting with Houston taking on Tampa Bay. In Tampa Bay, Ryan Pepio on the mound for the Rays. Colton Gordon going for the Astros. Colton Gordon, 6K price tag. I think if you need to pay down at pitcher, he's okay today. He's projected for like 5% ownership. I'd be getting to like 11% if the slate started right now. Not any level of actual priority here. He's not a particularly good pitcher, doesn't project as a particularly good pitcher, doesn't project to be terrible either, projects to be like a 20% K guy, mid fours, FIP, XFIP, etc. on the ERA metrics. Just kind of a guy who is probably a little bit underpriced. Not the best matchup in the world against Tampa Bay in Tampa, but also not the worst. It does help that a lot of Tampa Bay's best hitters are left-handed. Jonathan Aranda hits from the left side. Josh Lowe hits from the left side. Brandon Lau is left-handed, although he hits left-handed pitching well anyway. But as a result, you don't have Josh Lowe in the lineup. You don't have Jonathan Aranda in the lineup. Suddenly you have this Tampa Bay lineup where, the top of it is kind of good. Yandy Diaz is good. Caballero is hitting second. He's nothing special. Morel has power. Caminero is good. Brandon Lau is hitting fifth. And then, Danny Jansen's fine. Curtis Mead, Taylor Walls, Cam Misner at the bottom of this order. When it, on the spectrum of Tampa Bay lineups, it's a relatively bad one just because such a high percentage of their best hitters are left-handed. So that works in Gordon's favor as well. And then obviously we haven't talked about any other games yet, but pitching on this slate is also just not particularly good. Also, pricing on this slate from a pitching standpoint on DraftKings is actually good. So it kind of goes hand in hand where you have a few good pitchers on the slate, but they're not necessarily in the best matchups. But then DraftKings also priced them to be, because in a way where, because they're the best pitcher on the slate or one of the best pitchers on the slate, they are expensive. The only exception to that is Christopher Sanchez, who's pitching in Coors. He's still only 8K, but like Robbie Ray against Kansas City is $10,000. Chris Bubich is $9,700. These pitchers that from a talent standpoint are probably closer to like 9K guys are priced up a little bit more than usual. So that combined with the relative lack of pitching talent in general does make the idea of just kind of punting SP2 for somebody like Gordon make a little bit more sense, even though really he's just a guy. And then on the other side, Ryan Pepio looks like one of your better mid-range SP2s, $7,800 price tag. His strikeout percentage so far this year is down a bit, but his underlying metrics still look pretty good. So far this season, he has only struck out 21.2% of hitters. Last year, for comparison, he struck out 26%, but his stuff plus grade this year is still 108.5. Last year, it was about 109.5. Pitching plus, which factors in your command or an estimate of your command, is actually up 3 points to 111.2. That's a very good number there. His fastball velo still is about the same as it was last year. So I do think we see more strikeouts from Pepio going forward than we have to date. It's not the best strikeout matchup for him going up against Houston. Their active roster against right-handed pitching this season ranks, I think, 21st or 19th in strikeout percentage. They are 21st in WRC plus, 15th in strikeout percentage and 22nd in WRC plus on their active roster against right-handed pitching. So middle of the road strikeout matchup for him. He has given up a bit more power to right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters. And Houston's lineup is entirely right-handed with the exception of Caratini, but they still don't have a lot of power. Like Jeremy Pena, Isaac Paredes, Jose Altuve, these guys can hit home runs. Jake Myers, they'll hit home runs from time to time, but none of them are truly power hitters. The only guys in this lineup that have above average expected ISOs against right-handed pitching are Christian Walker and Yainer Diaz. So it's not a perfect matchup for Pepio, but again, you just don't really have anything that looks truly perfect on this slate from a pitching standpoint. So I do think Pepio makes sense. He's getting 15% ownership. I'm getting to about 22% right now. You can see the 14.5 fantasy point projection for him on the screen, or 15 fantasy point projection. I guess it changed since I've run stuff, but he just looks fine. Again, not a perfect spot, but good enough to be a pretty good play on this slate. Offensively, starting on the Houston side, I mentioned the power issues for Ryan Pepio against right-handed hitters in particular, and the two best right-handed power bats in this lineup are Yainer Diaz and Christian Walker. Pepio this season, a 200 expected ISO allowed to righties, 183 going back to last season. So far this year, Yainer Diaz with a 222 expected ISO, Christian Walker at 177. If you go back to last season, Walker gets up over 200. Diaz comes in at 164. Those are the two guys that I'm getting to the most often from Houston. Diaz showing up about 14% for me, Christian Walker showing up about 13%. And I think they both look pretty good. Prices are cheap on both of them. $3,400 price tag for Walker is very cheap for somebody with the power that he has. $3K for Yainer Diaz at catcher is very cheap. It's hard to find power hitting catchers, and that's a very cheap price tag. Then also, when you just think about this slate, obviously we haven't gotten to this game yet, but Adley Rutschman would have been your best hitting catcher plays, one of your best hitting catcher plays on the slate. He's not in the lineup. So you still have a couple of power hitting catchers. You have Cal Raleigh, you have Shea Langoliers, but like Cal Raleigh is up over 5K. He's almost twice as expensive as Yainer Diaz on a slate where you do have pitching to pay up for. You have other offenses to pay up for. So I think that Diaz looks like a very good value. Then you do have some other, decent value bats here as well with Paredes, Pena, Altuve. Altuve has multi-position eligibility, second base and outfield. Second base is a relatively weak position today as well. Isaac Paredes is cheap at third base. Pena, at a relatively weak shortstop position as well. No Corey Seager, no Ellie De La Cruz on this slate. You do have Gunnar, but not the best shortstop slate. No Francisco Lindor. So saving a little bit of money at shortstop is another thing that can make some sense getting to Pena. So I think Paredes, Pena, Altuve, kind of your secondary plays here. Diaz and Walker are the ones that I like the most from the Astros. On the Tampa Bay side, plenty of ownership coming in here. Yandy Diaz leading the way at 21%. Christopher Morel at 19%. 18% coming into Caballero, who now projects as a good value play because he's hitting second. Earlier in the day, projected lineups had him hitting like 7th or 8th. So you do get a lineup bump on him. He has shortstop and outfield eligibility as well. Caminero at 4,200 getting 16% ownership. Brandon Lau, 3,900 getting 12%. About 12% coming into Danny Jansen and Curtis Mead as well. So there is a lot of ownership coming into this team. And I understand it. And I don't hate it, but I do have some concerns. Starting with the spots that I like a lot, Yandy Diaz just looks really good here. He has an expected ISO well over 200 against left-handed pitching since the start of last season. Gordon doesn't get a lot of swings and misses. So I think that, you expect Diaz to be able to take advantage and He projects well here, 394 expected WOBA, 215 expected ISO, and 195 plate appearances against lefties since last season. Where I start to get a little bit concerned, and I am getting to 22% Diaz right now. I'm also getting to 17% Caballero. I'm getting to 13% Christopher Morel. And that is a function of value. They're hitting at the top of the order. Caballero gives you stolen base upside. Morel gives you some power upside. I do have a little bit of hesitation with this team in general because of pinch hit risk here. We have, as you can see on the screen, we don't have particularly high pinch hit percentages for most of this team. 36% to Curtis Mead is the highest and obviously pretty high. 16% to Danny Jansen. I don't really anticipate him actually getting pinch hit for. 10% to Caballero and 7% to Morel. I actually think might be a little bit low because of how this lineup looks. You have Josh Lowe back. He's been injured for a lot of the year. So if you're looking at the frequency that Tampa Bay guys have been pinch hit for so far this season, which I do know is a big way that we derive our pinch hit percentage when we run our in-house sims, it's going to underestimate it a little bit for outfielders because Tampa Bay hasn't had Josh Lowe as a pinch hit option so far this season. He got hurt opening day and he just returned, but now they have him and he is coming off the bench. So you have Caballero playing right field. You have Morel playing left field. There's a very, very good chance that one of those guys is getting pinch hit for by Josh Lowe when Colton Gordon leaves this game. There's a pretty good chance that the other one is getting pinch hit for by Chandler Simpson when Gordon leaves the game. I don't think that's as much of a lock because Simpson's not a great hitter. They could just, hold off and use him as a pinch runner at some point. But kind of without a doubt, unless he's injured or something, I think they're probably going to get Josh Lowe into this game at some point to pinch hit. So that's concerning. And then you have Curtis Mead, who we do have the very high pinch hit risk on. He's playing first base. That's kind of just a given that becomes Jonathan Aranda as soon as a right-handed pitcher is coming in to face Mead. So while this is a good value stack, they're really cheap. I do think you run the risk of by the time you get to the 7th or 8th inning, this team that you stacked, that you grabbed 5 guys from, 2 or 3 of those guys are no longer in the game. So I do have concerns here, even a little bit more than our projections show for Tampa Bay. Specifically Mead, Caballero, and Morel being the guys that concern me the most. I'm not getting too much Caminero here, which I wouldn't be mad if I was. I think he's a good play. I think Brandon Lau's a good play, but I'm not getting too much of him either. Overall, I think the ownership is just scaring me off a little bit. There are other good value spots to get to. Einsteinium mentioned Baltimore, who I liked a lot more before they released their lineup, but they are really cheap. They do have talent for sure. There's plenty of other spots you can get to at, I think, a little bit lower ownership. So this is one of those where, I think Tampa's good. I understand why they have ownership. If you want to play Tampa, fine. Just find ways to differentiate elsewhere. For me personally, right now at least, I am getting some of them, but overall not as much as the field. Seattle taking on the White Sox in Chicago. Luis Castillo going for the Mariners. Davis Martin going for the White Sox. And this is another, I think, pretty interesting tournament spot. I'm interested to see where I actually end up. Right now, I can see what I'm getting, and it scares me. But I think one of the more interesting spots on this slate is Luis Castillo taking on the White Sox, because the White Sox are obviously terrible. This is one of the worst teams in baseball. They have the second lowest WRC plus against right-handed pitching this season. They have the fifth highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. You have Luis Castillo, who historically is a very good pitcher, good strikeout pitcher, clearly has the advantage here. The part that I think is interesting is that you do have pretty significant red flags on Luis Castillo so far this season, and you're not really getting a discount. He's $9,500 here because of the matchup against the White Sox and because of Luis Castillo's pedigree. But if you just look at what Luis Castillo has done so far this season, he's nowhere near a $9,500 pitcher. He has an 18.2% strikeout percentage. That's down from 24.3% last year. 95.3 stuff plus is nearly 8 points lower than last season. 99.5 pitching plus is about 6 points lower than last season. He really just has not been particularly good across the board. Now, you can look to his last start against the Yankees. It was one of his best starts of the season. His stuff plus was, I believe, his highest of the season. His Fastball velo was highest of the season at like 95.5 miles per hour. He cut back on his sinker usage, threw his four-seam fastball more, threw his slider more. Maybe that's a change he makes. And in general, cutting back on sinker usage and increasing four-seam usage and slider usage is going to make a pitcher's strikeout percentage increase. So if that's a change that he's going to make going forward, his strikeout numbers are almost definitely going to come up. They're probably going to come up anyway, just because of what he's been throughout his career, even if they don't get all the way back to where they were before. So you can look to that, as a potential positive for Castillo as well. The concerns here, though, are that, everything I just mentioned, but then you're getting not only the elevated $9,500 price tag, you're also getting about a quarter of the field playing him because it's Luis Castillo against the White Sox. So right now, I wouldn't be getting him in large field tournaments. I do think that playing him is fine. Like, he still looks like one of the better pitchers on the slate, but I don't really hate just kind of hoping that even if he has a good game, that, I can just find other alternatives to get to. And then obviously if he does have a mediocre game or a bad game, even, you're in a really good spot with him being 24% owned. So I wouldn't hate if I got more of him once I'm actually running my lineups. I do think that potentially I get some, once I do X out that Minnesota game that has Bailey Ober as an option, for example. But I think it's a really interesting spot where, on the one hand, like, you're paying a premium in terms of both salary and ownership. I talked about, or I mentioned it on a show the other day, that you can think of ownership as an additional cost because of the fact that the more popular someone is, the less they matter. The less them doing well helps you win a tournament. So you're paying basically the highest actual cost in salary that you're going to get on Castillo. Then you're paying another high cost in ownership, and you are rostering somebody that hasn't been very good this year. But again, you can't really have much confidence in saying somebody like Castillo is not actually going to be good against the White Sox, because they absolutely suck. So not telling anyone not to play Castillo. I wouldn't be upset if I got more of him, but right now I'm not getting to him. Davis Martin on the other side, no real interest there. He's not that cheap. He's 7,200. He has shown signs of improvement this year. Stuff plus, pitching plus, both up. He's somebody that stole Hayden Birdsong's spike changeup last season and had some success with it. He realized in a bullpen session that he had a very similar release point, very similar delivery to Giants pitcher Hayden Birdsong. Birdsong has a very effective changeup, and Martin essentially just stole his grip and started throwing it. And like I said, did have some success, but at a $7,200 price tag against what's been one of the best offenses in baseball in Seattle, I don't think this is a spot where I need to be chasing Davis Martin having a good game. I've done it on some other slates. Don't think I'll be doing it on this one. Offensively, the Mariners are in a pretty solid spot here. You do get a bit of a park upgrade. Obviously, getting out of T-Mobile Park, pretty much everything is a park upgrade. Even if you do think that Martin is a little bit better than he has been in the past, he still isn't anything special. He's not anybody that I think you're like actively avoiding Mariners bats against or anything like that. So far this season, left-handed hitters still have a 202 expected ISO against him, even with him throwing that changeup 39% of the time. Right-handed hitters have a 211 expected ISO, so he hasn't done a very good job mitigating damage so far. Jorge Polanco getting sub 10% ownership. Cal Raleigh coming in at about 10%. I'm a little over the field on both of them. They are both expensive, and that's why you see relatively low ownership, but I talked about maybe getting to some Colton Gordon as a cheap arm earlier. Ryan Pepio at 7,800. I think this Mariners offense is one of the ones that you look to if you are paying down for some relatively low-owned cheap pitching. You're getting a lot of upside here with Jorge Polanco, who has an expected ISO near 300 against right-handed pitching so far this season at 297. Cal Raleigh has an expected ISO of 319 against right-handed pitching. Julio Rodriguez at 189. JP Crawford at 155 with stolen base upside. Rowdy Tellez has significant pinch hit risk, but he has an expected ISO above 300 as well. But Polanco, Raleigh, Rodriguez, the guys I'm getting to the most, and then just filling in some stacks with Crawford or Rosarena, and then some Leody Taveras as well as a cheap bat. But I do like Polanco and especially Cal Raleigh quite a bit here, even at the elevated price tags. On the White Sox side, even though I don't love Castillo here, this still isn't a spot where I expect to get too much of the White Sox. Not getting any ownership. You can obviously make the negative correlation argument in large field tournaments against Castillo, but I still think that if you're not playing Castillo, you're not avoiding him because you think there's a really high chance that he's going to have a bad start. It's more so that you're just probably turning him into more of some combination of like Robbie Ray, Chris Bubich, paying down a little bit more, maybe to like a Pepio. Maybe you're playing a lot more like Christopher Sanchez at 8K. I think and then you're just hoping those guys beat Castillo more so than you're actually scared of the spot against the White Sox. It's more if you don't have Castillo, obviously if he has a bad start, that's great, but it's more so you're just saying like, all right, hopefully he goes 5 or 6 innings, but he only strikes out like 4 guys. Maybe he doesn't get a win, scores like 16 DraftKings points, 15 DraftKings points, something like that. And I can just beat that elsewhere more so than, thinking the White Sox are actually going to do damage against him. There's a really big window here for the outcome where Castillo's not a pitcher you need, but the White Sox don't do anything to really help you either. So I'm not really getting to much of them. Marginal amounts of Palacios, Matt Tice, Luis Robert, who are all cheap. Well, Palacios and Tice are cheap. Robert's 4,600, Vaughn 2,700, hitting in the middle of that order, but not any sort of priority for me there, even though I'm not getting to Castillo right now. And again, that's not even a super confident take by me that I'm not going to end up with Castillo. But even right now where he's not in my lineups, I'm still not getting to the White Sox. Guardians and Twins, I'm going to keep this one brief because, again, I don't think this game's going to play. But just in case it does, we have Bailey Ober going for Minnesota. We have Logan Allen going for the Guardians. About 7% projected ownership coming into Allen at 6,500. I don't have him right now, but as a low probability play at 60 or low salary play rather at 6,500, he's fine. On the other side, Bailey Ober is getting 23% ownership right now. If this game somehow plays, I do think he looks pretty good. He'd be in 21% of my lineups. He's only 8,200, so he would look like one of your better mid-range plays. He's a decent pitcher overall this season, only striking out 19% of hitters. That is down from 27% last year. Stuff plus is down about a point. Pitching plus is down about 1.5 points. But again, on this slate at 8,200, he just looks fine. Cleveland's not the easiest team to strike out, but they're not the scariest offense either. So far this season against right-handed pitching, they rank 17th in strikeout percentage on their active roster. They rank 16th in WRC+. I think just kind of getting around the field on Ober makes sense. But again, I don't think this is even going to matter. It seems very likely that this game is not going to play. Offensively, not getting to too much from the Cleveland side. Obviously, if you want to get some Jose Ramirez, I think that's perfectly fine. But there's nothing that really stands out to me there. And then on the Minnesota side, I'm getting to some Harrison Bader, Brooks Lee, Ryan Jeffers. Those guys I think all look okay, but nothing that I would say is a priority offensively. To me, if this game does go, the top option is Bailey Ober. But again, seems pretty unlikely that that's going to happen. Although it does seem like maybe it's getting a little bit more likely. Just updated the Roth's weather report, and it's gotten a little bit better. So we'll see. Actually, so it looks like now potentially you could get rain during the game as opposed to a washout. So I do want to mention that being a difference, because obviously if the game doesn't play, the game just doesn't play. But now you probably also want to pay attention to exactly when the rain is expected to come in, because if this game's going to start and then you're going to get rain moving in the 3rd or 4th inning, you don't want Bailey Ober. You probably wouldn't want any of it, but you wouldn't want the starting pitching. Whereas if the rain is likely to hold off to the end of the game, which is more similar to what I think we're going to see in St. Louis, then you can go to them. So do pay attention to the weather in this game, absolutely, and exactly how it's going to impact starting pitching as well. Baltimore taking on Milwaukee in Milwaukee. Quinn Priester on the mound for the Brewers. Dean Kramer is going for the Orioles. About a 13 fantasy point projection on Kramer, about 12 for Priester. The Orioles lineup is a bit weaker than usual, and that's still not really getting me to Quinn Priester, but I did want to mention it. He is projected for about 2% ownership. I'm getting to about 2%. He's 6,900. He's not a particularly good pitcher overall. He does have pretty drastic splits, though, as far as not being able to get out lefties and not being good against righties, but not being horrendous either. 19.5% K percentage with only a 278 expected WOBA allowed to righties. Only a 10.5% strikeout percentage against lefties. 176 expected ISO. And then so far this year, obviously limited sample, 185 expected ISO to lefties. So you did get an Orioles lineup that does not have Adley Rutschman. That's the biggest drop-off, is you're replacing Adley Rutschman with Maverick Handley. Adley Rutschman, obviously good hitter, especially in terms of expected numbers, if you're looking into those. Maverick Handley, not a hitter, period. And then you don't have Heston Kjerstad. You have Dylan Carlson instead. That's not as much of a difference. It's more of it makes the Orioles offense lower ceiling because Kjerstad has more power than Carlson. But the big one is, turning a left-handed good Adley Rutschman into a right-handed non-factor in Handley. But none of that, like I said, is enough to make me actually want to be getting too much Priester here. 8% projected ownership coming into Dean Kramer. I'm getting to about 7%. Power said that Priester's getting the opener. I hadn't seen that, but oh yeah, I see it now. So that is a negative for the Orioles, probably more so than Priester even. Not because you weren't going to get the Priester a lot anyway. But that means that the Orioles are getting a left-handed opener against Holiday and Henderson. So I'll touch on that more when I get to the O's. But not a big difference for Priester. It is a little bit of a downgrade for the O's. For Dean Kramer, this is just kind of another. It's a slate with a lot of questionable pitching. I have no confidence whatsoever in Kramer. His strikeout percentage this year is down a lot. He's only struck out 15.7% of hitters. Last year, he struck out 22.2%. On the plus side for him, his stuff plus is actually up 2 points from 96.3 to 98.3. Pitching plus is up from 96.4 to 97.9. Fastball velo is about the same. It's up like a half mile an hour. So the underlying stuff seems fine for Kramer. He just hasn't gotten strikeouts, hasn't been particularly effective this year. So as a result, you're getting him at 7K. This Milwaukee matchup is middle of the road. They rank against right-handed pitching so far this season. The Brewers are 25th in WRC plus. They are 21st in strikeout percentage. If you just land on some Kramer, that's fine. I don't think he's a priority. He's not somebody that I would be taking out of lineups or actively avoiding or anything either. In small field, I think you probably ignore him. In large field, getting 5 to 10% is perfectly fine with me. Now moving on to the offenses here. Jackson Holiday getting 9% ownership, Gunnar Henderson getting 8%. Those are the two highest owned bats for the O's. And I do like them both. Holiday, 3,400, really cheap price tag. He has lived up to his scouting report, his pedigree so far this season. He's been one of the most productive hitters on the Orioles. He has an expected ISO north of 200 against right-handed pitching. WRC plus is, I think, around 115 last I looked. Gives you some speed, even though he only has a couple stolen bases. So I think he is still underpriced, especially now that he is leading off and not buried at the bottom of the order. It is a big negative for him, though, that his first at-bat now will be against a left-handed pitcher. So that is probably one reason that you do see modest ownership on him. Is that, not that you're throwing away that first at bat, but you're kind of throwing away that first at bat. Gunnar Henderson, similar, obviously he can do damage against anybody, but you greatly prefer him against right-handed pitching. His first at bat now will not be. He's 4,700 though, which is a pretty cheap price tag for Gunnar Henderson. He, started the year off slowly, started the year on the injured list, had the injured oblique, but you've seen him start to come around lately, hitting for more power. We know who Gunnar Henderson is from a power standpoint and having some stolen base upside as well. So you are getting him at a discounted salary. I'm getting around 8 to 9%, both him and Jackson. So pretty much in line with the field on them. Ramon Laureano, 3,100 batting cleanup. It's a quality value play, and he's not getting much ownership. Right now, only projected for sub 5% ownership at 3,100. I really don't mind it. He has power. He's a flawed hitter, but he has power. He has, some stolen base upside. Mountcastle actually now benefits from the opener. Not that it's an ideal matchup, but he does at least get to face the lefty before Priester. He's 3,500 in 5% of my lineups. I'm pretty much getting around 5% or so of most of the Orioles. So is the field, with the exception of being a little bit higher than that on Holiday and Gunnar. One other negative for Baltimore too is a stack. So they have, in addition to however you pronounce the opener's name, which I'm not even going to try. In addition to him, Milwaukee does also have two other lefties. They have Jared Koenig, who pitched yesterday but didn't pitch the day before, and they have Tyler Alexander, who didn't pitch yesterday. So I assume those guys are both available, and you're potentially going to get, what the Brewers could end up doing here is you get Zastrinsky or whatever his name is opening. And so thinking about this in terms of Jackson Holiday and Gunnar specifically, maybe O'Hearn, but specifically Jackson and Gunnar, what you could actually end up seeing here is their first at bat is against the opener. And then Priester comes in. Second at bat for Holiday and Henderson is against Priester. Priester goes something 3 innings, 2 1/3, something like that. Gets back to Jackson and Gunnar, and they go to the bullpen for a lefty. So you could get one at bat against a righty here, probably two at most. Maybe Priester faces them a second time. There's basically no way that Priester's facing that part of the lineup a third time. So that is a pretty big negative for the good left-handed hitters on Baltimore right now. On the Milwaukee side, going up against Kramer, no real ownership here. I'm not getting them much either. I thought I'd actually have a little bit more, but Kramer's biggest issue so far this year has been left-handed power. The Brewers don't have much of it. 252 expected ISO, 375 expected WOBA to left-handed hitters. The best power bats you have in this lineup are $4,600 Bryce Turang and $4,300 Christian Yelich. Turang, Nicholas said, doesn't Priester go a bit deeper than that? Priester's not starting the game. So probably not. Like what they're probably going to do is have Jastrzynski go an inning or inning and 2/3 or whatever. Then Priester's going to come in. And then at best, the third time that he would face Gunnar and Holiday, they're going to go to the bullpen. At worst, they just have him go like 3 and they actively avoid having him face them again. It would be very, very unlikely that Holiday or Gunnar are getting more than 2 at-bats at most against Priester. Stevens said, talk me out of taking a Mullins home run prop. So Mullins actually isn't in the same position as those guys because he's batting 7th. His first at-bat most likely is going to be against Priester. He's still probably only going to get 2, I would assume. But at least that first at-bat's against Priester. Then you do have him, like, he's after Urias, he's before Carlson and Hanley. So the priority for Milwaukee from a matchup standpoint is going to be getting lefties in the game to face Holiday and Henderson more so than to face Mullins. Not to say Mullins won't face any lefties, but Mullins' first at bat should at least be against Priester, whereas you're kind of giving up an at bat for Holiday and Henderson. But on the flip side, he's batting 7th, so he's going to get less at bats. For Milwaukee, like I said, Kramer does struggle a bit more against lefties. 375 expected WOBA, 252 expected ISO so far this season. There's not guys that can really take advantage of that on Milwaukee. Turang at second base, if you get there, fine. He gives you some stolen base upside as well. Yelich, obviously a solid hitter. He's 4,300, but there's always a million good outfield bats. I'm getting to a little bit of Chourio and Contreras, so is the field, but basically 5% ownership, give or take, to most of the quality bats on Milwaukee. I'm a little bit lower than that. I think, it's an okay spot against Kramer, but there's also other spots on the slate that I do prefer. Now, the other game with interesting weather here, Detroit taking on the Cardinals in St. Louis. Sonny Gray is pitching for the Cards. We're getting an opener for Detroit, followed by Keter Montero. Pitching for the Tigers doesn't matter. I don't think. You're not rostering either of them. Sonny Gray obviously does matter. He is 9K. He doesn't have the best matchup here against Detroit. The Tigers rank 13th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They rank 4th in WRC+. Sonny Gray is a good pitcher, but he does also have some issues this season. Strikeout percentage this year, 24.8%. That's good, but it's down from 30.3% last year. Stuff plus is down from 97.3 to 96.2. But the really concerning thing is the pitching plus drop-off so far this year from 107.1 down 11 points to 96.2. That is the metric that tries to combine stuff with command and ability to put the ball where you want it. Seeing that drop off for somebody like Sonny Gray is definitely alarming. So I think he's fine here, but he is also getting 28% ownership at 9K. I'm getting about half of that right now. I think he's a good pitcher. I think it's a scary matchup. It does also kind of stand out a little bit that Detroit's implied run total is relatively high for a matchup with Sonny Gray in St. Louis. Like, it's not a great park for offense. It's not a great park for home runs. And Detroit still has an implied run total north of 4. Not that that is the end all be all here, but it is something that kind of stands out when you're talking about Sonny Gray here. So I think he's fine. I'm not getting quite as much as the field, though. From a weather standpoint, this one does also look a bit better than it did earlier, but it seems like it has the potential for rain to move in later in the game. So if I were to do anything with this game, and with what we have right now, if the slate started right now, I would just play this game straight up and hope it works out. But I would actually be a little bit more concerned about the bats than the pitching here. Whereas in the Minnesota game, I'd be more concerned about the pitching, or at least equally concerned with the pitching, because if you get an early delay, your pitching is just blown. Here, it seems like if you do get rain, it potentially ends the game, let's say the 7th inning. You lose those final at-bats from your offense, but Sonny Gray's out of the game. And if it gets timed perfectly, you're getting like a complete game from him in 6 or 7 innings. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about the pitching here. Depending on what the forecast looks like when we get to lock, I would potentially be concerned about the bats. But with the way it looks right now, I would probably just go ahead and play it and hope for the best. Offensively, Field's not getting to much of Detroit. Neither am I. Gray has struggled with power to both sides of the plate this year. I mentioned the drop off in strikeout percentage, drop off in pitching plus, and one thing that you see that big drop off in pitching plus, which suggests that it's a command issue because his stuff plus didn't drop that much. That pretty easily explains how you end up with a 192 expected ISO to righties and a 212 expected ISO to lefties so far this year if you're not putting the ball where you want it. Now, keep in mind, this is a small sample size. He's thrown less than 400 pitches to lefties and less than 400 to righties. He has a track record of being a very good pitcher. He probably figures it out. He's probably better from this point forward than he has been to this point. But he has struggled with power. You do have Kerry Carpenter, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson as legit power bats in this lineup. But it's still not a spot that I would be looking to prioritize at all. The park isn't great for home runs. You still have, Gray with this long track record of being a good pitcher. On the other side, Ford St. Louis, I think that's going to be the more interesting spot offensively, but I'm still not really getting much of that, and neither is the field. Again, not a great park for offense, and getting the opener here does make them less appealing because, it's the same reason that bullpen games just aren't super appealing to take offenses against these days. It used to be great because teams used to have, your starters were your best pitchers, and then relievers outside of like your closer were guys that couldn't cut it as a starter. Whereas now teams just have guys that throw 95 plus miles an hour across the board out of the bullpen. You see them once, then you see somebody else, and it makes it unappealing. And so here for the Cards, you're going to get, your first at bat, at least for the guys at the top of the order, against the opener. Then you're going to get at bats like 2 and 3 against Montero. Then at bat 4 and maybe 5 are going to be against 2 other pitchers. So it just kind of limits, it limits how often you're going to see the same pitcher, and it does limit your projection a little bit. If you want to get to some Nootbaar, he's up to 5K in the outfield, which is a problem, but he has earned it. He has an expected ISO north of 200 against right-handed pitching this year. Mason Wynn gives you some stolen base upside. Brendan Donovan and Contreras have some power, but you can only roster Contreras at first base, which hurts a bit. So overall, I don't really see any priorities from offense in general in this game. The closest thing to a priority would be Sonny Gray in this game. But again, right now I'm getting less than him than the field as well. Philadelphia taking on the Rockies in Colorado. We have our most popular pitcher in this game in 8K, Christopher Sanchez, going for Philadelphia. On the other side for the Rockies, it is Kyle Freeland. I don't expect... Okay, he's showing up for me right now. I don't think I'll actually end up playing him. Kyle Freeland is... The case for Kyle Freeland would simply be he's 5K, and the Phillies are going to be really popular. So if Kyle Freeland, by some absolute miracle, has a good start, you're holding off a large percentage of the field. You have a cheap pitcher doing well, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think I'm actually going to end up with much of him, but he isn't getting any ownership. The spot that I would really want to get to here is Christopher Sanchez. One other thing I will mention on Freeland, he is probably a better pitcher than like you think he is or than people give him credit for, but he's certainly not any good. And the matchup sucks also. So there's nothing about Freeland that suggests he's going to actually have a good game here. Christopher Sanchez is the side that I certainly want to get to. He's only 8K. And so whatever concerns you have about, he's in Coors Field. Like I saw somebody mention earlier that they were surprised the pitcher in Coors is getting this much ownership. Whatever concern you have about Coors, yeah, it's justified because pitching in Coors sucks. No matter who you are, you're going to be worse in Coors Field than you would be outside of Coors Field. But from a talent standpoint, especially a talent standpoint against the Rockies, Christopher Sanchez is like a $9,500 10K pitcher, something like that. So getting him at 8K is completely taking the fact he's in Coors Field and baking it into his salary. That doesn't mean he's never going to have a good game, obviously. Like he can still fail at 8K. But in terms of just from like a projection standpoint and a thinking about pros and cons standpoint, whatever negative you have about this park, it's just completely mitigated when you say, yeah, but he's 8K. He has shown massive improvement over last season. He was already good, but stuff plus this year is up from 106.5 to 114. Pitching plus has stayed about the same, 110.7 to 110.9. Fastball velo is up from 94.5 to 95.5 miles an hour. Strikeout percentage last year was 20.3%. This year he's up to 28.4. The Rockies are awful. Even if you just look at splits at stats at home for teams this year, the Rockies have the third highest strikeout percentage in baseball at home. They play in a park where it's one of the most difficult parks to get strikeouts because the ball doesn't move as much as it does because of the altitude. They still strike out more than almost anybody else in baseball. If you look at their active roster against left-handed pitching since 2023, they have the highest strikeout percentage at 27.9%. The next highest, the A's, are over 3 points lower at 24.7%. They have the second worst WRC plus, only ahead of Miami. This team is awful. Sanchez is really, really good. And another nice thing about Sanchez too, all three of his pitches, his sinker, his fastball, and his slider, grade out as well above average. So that is something that, you know, a pitcher can be really good on one pitch or two pitches, but you run the risk of, you know, they don't have that pitch that day and they have to rely on secondary pitches that just aren't as effective. That's a lower risk with Sanchez. Like, yeah, sure, he's going to have some games where he just doesn't have it point blank, period. But if his slider just isn't on, he can get by with more, just throwing more fastballs, throwing more changeups. But, you know, because they're very good pitches as well. So everything for Sanchez looks good here. He's getting 30% ownership. I'm getting the 46%. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually ended up getting 45% ownership. One trend that I think we've seen across the industry so far this season is that ownership as a whole, I think, has been okay, but where it misses the most is on the kind of just like clear SP1. We've seen it on the cheap Chris Sale days. We saw it on Sanchez earlier this season already when he was like, I don't know, 7,200 or something. He was at some stupid price point against like maybe the Marlins. We've seen that where SP1 pitcher ownership just gets blown up. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if Sanchez even comes in more popular than 30%. And I don't mind it. Like, I think he's clearly the top pitcher today. It's just a matter of, you know, you do still have plenty of other pitchers on the slate that you can look to, especially in larger field tournaments. But Sanchez, I think, does look very good. Happy to get to him. Matty Joe said, what makes a ballpark bad for strikeouts? The way the sun shines on the hitters or the shadows? So the sun and shadows thing is generally going to be more of a time of day issue. Some parks will be more difficult, like will be more susceptible to getting shadows at times that you're typically playing a baseball game than others. But it's more so batter's eye has a role. And then dimensions, like Michael said, specifically referring to foul territory. Like the Oakland Coliseum was a park that actually wasn't great for getting strikeouts because you'll get 2 strikes on a guy and they'll pop a pitch up down the first baseline that in any other stadium would be 5 rows back. But in Oakland, because they have massive foul territory, it would just be a pop out. So like you would get lower strikeouts there. In Colorado, it's because of the altitude. Pitches don't move as much, so it's harder to get swings and misses. In Kansas City, they have a very clean batter's eye in center field, the area behind the center field wall that hitters are picking up the ball out of. It's generally going to be a dark area, but some parks have less kind of noise around it than others. So like Kansas City, hitters generally say they have a very good time picking up the ball out of pitchers' hands. That'll drive down strikeout percentage a little bit. So there are just kind of different factors that go into it. Looking at the offenses here, obviously, great spot for Philadelphia, best spot on the slate. They're getting like 10 to 20% ownership, at least for the most relevant guys, Real Muto, Turner, Harper, Castellanos, Schwarber. I'm not getting much of them, which terrifies me. Probably has to do with optimizing specifically for this $5 50,000 entry tournament that we have tonight. If it were like the $15 11K field, I probably would have more Philadelphia than I do. Might have more of them by lock. They're obviously the best offense. It's just a matter of, you know, how can you get to them? What does the rest of your lineup look like? Where else are you going to give up? Where are you going to mitigate ownership if you're going to them? Because, you know, I've mentioned it before. One reason that playing popular pitching and being contrarian with bats makes sense, is simply that pitching is more projectable. There's still variance, there's still volatility, but your pitchers are more projectable than hitters are. But the other thing is that when you think about stacking and how many spots you have in your lineup, if I play one popular pitcher, I have 9 spots to find ways to be different in my lineup. If I stack Philadelphia and get to the guys, especially that I really want to get to, that's 50% of my lineup that is 10 to 20% owned. And then on top of the fact that 10 to 20% of the field has those hitters, the stacks themselves are going to overlap a lot. So one way you can mitigate that, and Einsteinium just mentioned it in chat, you can go to guys like Weston Wilson, Edmundo Sosa, Johan Rojas at the bottom of the order. They're going to be lower owned than the guys at the top. Yes, it weakens your stack a little bit. Obviously, turning like Kyle Schwarber or something into Johan Rojas is not ideal from an upside standpoint, but it also is going to offset some ownership. It's going to save you some salary. So maybe you can get like a good one-off somewhere that most Philadelphia stacks don't have. For example, let's say you play Edmundo Sosa at second base instead of Trey Turner at shortstop. You save some money there, and then you play like Bobby Witt. Let's say the Phillies have a good game. They, just the stack does really well, but Bobby Witt hits 2 home runs and steals a base. The percentage of Philadelphia stacks that are going to have Bobby Witt are going to be very low because such a high percentage of Philadelphia stacks are going to have Trey Turner because he's such a key part of that offense. So that's one way you can really differentiate without sacrificing upside, is being able to get to like a really high upside one-off at a position where a lot of those stacks are going to have the same player. You just have Bobby Witt beat Trey Turner and you're in good shape, just as an example off the top of my head. So again, clearly if you can get the Philly and offset some ownership, great. That's not what I'd be having right now, which scares the shit out of me. But also they're expensive, 6,100 to Harper, 6,400 to Schwarber, 5,900 to Turner, 5,200 to Castellanos, 4,900 for Real Muto. Like DraftKings did a good job on pricing today, not only with pitching, but they priced the Phillies as if they're playing in Coors Field. We've seen a lot of offenses this year playing in Coors Field priced like they're playing anywhere else. So that is helping keep the ownership in check, and also probably a reason that I'm not getting as much of them as I thought that I would. On the other side, not getting much Colorado either. The argument for them is basically the same as I had said for Freeland. Like, they're playing a popular pitcher in Sanchez. They're low owned. They're in Coors Field. They can do well. Tovar, Goodman, Beck are solid. Doyle's solid. But overall, it's a shitty offense. It's a bad matchup. And I don't really see the need to get there. I do think if I had to choose one between the White Sox or the Rockies, even though I'm almost definitely going to end up playing more Sanchez than Castillo, and I think Sanchez is a better pitcher than Castillo, I would rather stack the Rockies than the White Sox, I think, because, for one, they're in Coors Field, but also Sanchez is at that 8K price tag where for him not to be at least a good play on this slate, he kind of has to actually have a bad game, barring injury. Like, yeah, he could get hurt after 2 innings or something, but like at 8K, if he only gives up like 3 runs, goes 6 innings, strikes out 6-7 guys, he's a useful pitcher, even if he's not the best. Whereas Castillo at 9,500, if he scores 20 points, you probably found that cheaper elsewhere. Or he lost to the other guys priced around him. Whereas, Sanchez, guys priced around him, there's not a ton. Like Bailey Ober, Ryan Pepio, they're fine. But you kind of need, if you don't have Sanchez, you kind of need him to actually give up runs more than you need Castillo to actually give up runs. So I would, if I had to choose between the two, prefer the Rockies. That being said, I don't really have much of either. Kansas City is taking on the Giants in San Francisco. Chris Bubich for the Royals, Robbie Ray for the Giants. I haven't looked everywhere in the industry. I'm pretty sure we have the highest Chris Bubich projection, and I doubt it's particularly close. Our model likes Chris Bubich a lot, and I like him in this spot as well. Good ground ball pitcher, good strikeout pitcher. This is his first season back in the rotation. He had been a starter when he first came up, didn't have a ton of success. They moved him to the bullpen, but now he's back in the starting rotation. 25.5% strikeout percentage this year is good. Stuff plus grades 96.5, which is fine. Not great, but it's not horrible. 102.2 pitching plus. Just looks like a pretty good pitcher. Again, overpriced at 9,700 probably, but he's only getting about 13% ownership. That's like half the ownership that Luis Castillo is getting. I think he's a better pitcher at this point than Luis Castillo is. You're pitching in San Francisco, which is one of the best places to pitch. And then another thing that, doesn't stand out immediately because it's not typically what you're looking for. But we don't have a Giants lineup yet, as far as I know. Refreshing, but the projected lineup for the Giants is predominantly right-handed. You only have one left-handed bat, Jung-Hoo Lee, in the projected lineup for the Giants. Chris Bubich is a reverse splits pitcher. He has struck out 27.5% of the right-handed hitters that he has faced so far this year. Only a 269 expected WOBA, 121 expected ISO. Lefties, on the other hand, have only struck out 19.5% of the time, 180 expected ISO, 362 expected WOBA. So you have seen that so far this year. It's similar to what you see from Cole Reagans. Reagans is better against lefties than Bubich is, but 24% usage rate on his changeup, 21% swinging strike percentage. That's a pitch that is just very, very good against opposite-handed hitters. So you're probably going to get the Giants just blindly rolling a bunch of righties out there like they always do against lefties. And Chris Bubich actually is going to look pretty good in this matchup. So I'm getting a ton of him right now. He's in like 48% of my lineups. This is where a lot of my Luis Castillo went. It's where some of my Sonny Gray went. So, again, it's not foolproof. Like, he can have a bad start. I don't think he's actually a $9,700 pitcher, but I also don't think Castillo's a $9,500 pitcher. I don't think Robbie Ray is a $10,000 pitcher. So in the context of this slate, Bubich being one of the highest salaried pitchers makes sense to me. And I like the lack of ownership you're getting. I like the park. I like the matchup. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I'm fine getting to a good amount of Bubich here. On the other side, Robbie Ray getting 16% ownership at 10K. I'm pretty much around the field there. I have 13%. He is good. He scares the shit out of me at 10K. He's inefficient. He walks too many guys, strikes out too many guys from an efficiency standpoint. Just very difficult to work deep into games when you're walking or striking out like 70% of the batters you face or something like that. Exaggerating a little bit, but also not a great matchup against KC. They should strike out a bit more getting out of Kansas City and going anywhere. KC's the worst park for strikeouts in baseball, but still not going to be a high strikeout team, just higher than when they're at home. But, Robbie Ray is talented. His strikeout percentage is down this year. It's still good, though. 26.5% K percentage this year, was 33% last year. Stuff Plus is down 7 points. Pitching Plus has always sucked because he has no idea where the hell the ball is going. So he's in this bucket, though, with Sonny Gray, with Castillo, but particularly, I think, comparable to Sonny Gray, where he's still been good this year in terms of strikeouts, but everything looks worse than last year. Probably turns around sooner than later, but I don't know. But either way, one of the higher upside pitchers on this slate. So getting to him a little bit, but getting to more of Bubich. On the Kansas City side, not much ownership coming in here, which isn't surprising given the park and the matchup. But I do think that picking off a couple parts of this team makes some sense. Bobby Witt Jr., projected for sub 5% ownership. He's 6K. So I get it. Like, you have him at 6K on a team with a 4-run total, or you have a bunch of 6K guys on the team with a 6.5 total in cores. Clearly, you're going to those guys. And then you have plenty of other, expensive guys to get to as well. But, Bobby Witt, obviously just always going to be one of the higher upside guys on a slate. Good stolen base upside, good power upside. Now, the park clearly hurts the power upside. Assuming Patrick Bailey is catching for the Giants, that's a negative as well. He is extremely good at throwing out runners. Robbie Ray has already allowed more stolen bases this year than he had all of last year, though. So there is that. Like, I assume they'll at least try with Bobby Witt. May or may not be successful, but just purely from an upside standpoint, it's pretty obvious that getting to him at 3, 4, 5% ownership is going to make some sense. Jonathan India at 3,100, second base, third base eligible is a decent value option. Salvador Perez got catcher eligibility back, and that's big. He had been moved to first base, where opportunity cost just becomes really high, but his salary is down to $3,300. His expected WOBA this year is like 362. His actual is like 280, which is driving this drop off in production. Now, hitting in San Francisco is not the place where generally you expect to, start getting your WOBA back in line with your expected WOBA. You're probably just going to run bad there as well. But from an upside standpoint, he is cheap. He does have catcher eligibility. Maikel Garcia gives you stolen base upside as well. And then also, just as a reminder, if Patrick Bailey is not catching, it looks a lot better for Kansas City, because then you really have stolen base upside throughout this lineup. With Patrick Bailey, it's more you're hoping that they at least try, and then you take your chances there. If it's Sam Huff instead of Bailey, then it's going to look better for anybody on this team with speed. On the Giant side, Not getting much of them. Neither is the field. Elliot Ramos would be my top option. He's still only in like 3% of my lineups. Matt Chapman would be second. That's how the field sees it as well, pretty much. But nothing that is particularly interesting to me on the Giant side. Angels taking on the A's in Sacramento. Jose Soriano on the mound for the Angels. JT Ginn on the mound for the Athletics. I think this one is interesting. I kind of disagree. I'll say and I'm going to throw this in the notes section when I get done this show. I kind of think we're a little low on JT Ginn's projection. So starting with Soriano here, he's getting 2% ownership at 7,300. I have him in like one of 150 lineups right now. The case for Soriano is that he has the second best ground ball percentage of all qualified pitchers this year, 62% ground ball percentage, 130 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 131 to righties. When he's on, he's just keeping the ball on the ground. He's not getting a lot of strikeouts, 19% K percentage this year. Obviously, that's not ideal for DFS, but if he can just get ground balls for 6 innings, there's a decent chance that he's one of your better value options on this slate. Obviously, that's not, what you're projecting him to do, and I'm not playing him, but that would be your case for Soriano. It's more a case for maybe being a little bit hesitant about some of these A's bats, but I'll talk more about that when I get to the offensive side. For JT Ginn, I actually find him interesting here because of what he is good at and what the Angels are good at. The Angels as a whole offensively are not a great offense. They rank 24th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year. They have the highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. We don't have their lineup yet, but what you're most likely going to get is 6 right-handed hitters and 3 lefties. Shanuel, Moncada, and Rengifo being the lefties. Moncada and Rengifo switch hitters, but for the purposes of this matchup, lefties. Very limited sample so far in the majors. JT Ginn came up for a little bit last year and then, has a few starts this year. But in that limited sample, he's faced 99 total right-handed batters, 26.3% K percentage, 298 expected WOBA, 112 expected ISO, 6% walk percentage against those righties, 51% ground ball percentage. He's actually been very good. Again, small sample, but very good against the right-handed hitters that he has faced since coming up to the majors. Lefties have done damage. 17% strikeout percentage, 222 expected ISO, 366 expected WOBA. But you look at this Angels lineup, Yoan Moncada has been good this year. He's hitting the ball hard. He has an expected ISO above 200 against right-handed pitching. Luis Rengifo has an expected ISO below 100. Nolan Shanuel doesn't strike out. He's an annoying hitter, but he doesn't hit for a lot of power. The power in this lineup comes from Taylor Ward, Zach Neto, Jorge Soler, Logan O'Hoppe, Joe Adell. 1, most of those guys are guys that strike out a lot. And 2, they're all right-handed. And JT Ginn is only $6,700. So 15% projected ownership coming into JT Ginn right now. That's relatively high. I was hoping it would be lower. But I do think I'm a little bit more optimistic about him than our projections, just for the reasons I said. It's just a spot where I really like the way that his strengths counteract the strengths of the Angels lineup. It's still not a good park for pitching. It's still not a proven pitcher by any stretch. You're talking about like 400 total pitches thrown to righties. But I do always just find it interesting when you get a matchup like this where you have somebody with very extreme splits, and those splits would make him good against what would mitigate almost all of the best hitters in the opposing lineup. So I do think he's an interesting value play, even though I'm not getting to him right now. Similarly, I'm getting to a lot of the Angels right now, and I think that ends up getting walked back a bit because I'm going to end up just being a little bit lower on them for all the reasons I just said. But there is value here and plenty of upside for that value. Taylor Ward coming in at $3,500. That's just too cheap for the power upside that Taylor Ward has. Same goes for Jorge Soler at $3,400. Zach Neto is relatively expensive at $4,800. But he does give you stolen base upside. Shea Langoliers has really struggled to throw runners out so far this year. I don't know the reason. He's been good in his previous full seasons, but he's really struggled this year. He's only thrown out 13.5% of base stealers, so that would be good for Neto as well. So he looks good. I do actually like Moncada here. You get the platoon advantage. He's 4,400. He's not getting ownership. To me, Moncada is the guy that I really want from the Angels. And then if I'm getting to some Soler, I'm getting to some Ward for value, that's still fine. Some Neto is still fine. But the guy that I actually like the matchup for is Yoan Moncada. So just an interesting spot there. It is still a high upside spot overall because it's an unproven pitcher. It's a cheap team that does have power upside. But I did just want to point out those splits. On the other side for the Angels, like I said, not the best spot against Soriano. Very, very difficult to single out individual bats because he just doesn't give up power. He has such a good ground ball rate. The Angels bullpen does suck, though. They're like bottom third of the league in anything that you would want. Walk percentage, strikeout percentage, xFIP, ERA. They aren't good at it. So you do get add-on run upside here for a team that does have power. Generally, when I think about a spot like this, it's just go to the best hitters first. Like there's no real platoon angle that you have, but Soderstrom, Langeliers, Rooker, Butler, these guys all have power. They're all good hitters. They're getting Soderstrom, Langeliers, Rooker in particular are getting like 5 to 6% ownership. That's mostly where I am as well. So I don't love the matchup with Soriano from a power upside, but I do think it's a solid spot overall when you factor in the bullpen and the park. To catch up on a couple of questions in chat, Einsteinium said, with the flagship being $5 instead of the normal 15 to 18, the guys that are getting owned, do you expect them to carry more ownership because of the entry fee? No, it should be less because of the field size. You're going to get a higher percentage of entries from non 150 max players, or at least non-typical 150 max players. So in that $15 to $18 tournament, your 150 max guys are making up a higher percentage. So ownership is going to skew towards what they're doing more than in the $5, where it's going to be made up by more of guys that aren't playing as well, or at least aren't using projections or industry projections as much as your 150 max guys. So it's kind of like a trade-off where the raw ownership is going to be lower on the good plays, the best plays, but the raw number of teams that have them is going to be the same, if not higher, like 15% of 50K compared to, 22% of 11K. I don't know the answers off the top of my head, but like that's the total number of raw lineups. So I think playing more contrarian is generally going to be my approach in that tournament, even though ownership is lower, if that makes sense. Like if you took today's projected ownership and threw it into that $15, I'd probably be jamming the Phillies because it'll be like, why is 15% of a 10K field playing the Phillies? But when it's 15% of a 50K field, it's still like, yeah, okay, cool. I still think I need like some 2% owned guys in here. Trey Make said, he was just answering that. Then he said, being a lower volume player, I tend to try and spread out a bit, usually 5 to 10 lineups a night, 5 tonight. How would you balance lineups with a few lineups spread out or concentrate on spots? Generally, I don't think there's a right answer. It's not going to affect your like expected value. It's just going to affect your risk. So assuming that, you're playing for fun, you're playing with, $25 or whatever, it doesn't matter to you if you win or lose it. Pick a couple spots you like and just hammer those spots and hope they win. If you are like, if I obviously wouldn't recommend it, but if this is your last $25 and, you can't lose all 5, then spread out as much as you can. But yeah, like everybody's playing to win, but I'm saying, like assuming it's money that like you can afford to lose, like it should be, play the 5 lineups you like the most would be my recommendation, because it's not going to impact your expected return. And assuming that you can just come back and play tomorrow and play the day after that and play the day after that, if you lose your $25, play the lineups you like the most. There's not a perfect answer either way. It really just has to do with risk tolerance. Jorge said, I think given there are more home run upsides in other matchups and the Phillies price, that will push me to have them more as mini stacks. Yeah, I like that too. That is a good point also. Like Colorado is good for home runs, but it's not the best. There's not great home run parks really on this slate though either. San Francisco sucks. A's and Tampa Bay are both solid. Dodgers is good. Busch sucks. Okay, Milwaukee's good. Minnesota's actually good. Okay, I take it back. There's good home run parks. Okay, so moving on to the last one, Diamondbacks taking on the Dodgers in LA. This is a game where I do appear to be getting ownership, and it is another game where I have some interesting thoughts on pitching. I'm not getting to either one. Neither is the field, but we have Brandon Pfaadt going for the Diamondbacks. We have Landon Knack going for the Dodgers. Brandon Pfaadt, 8,700, facing the Dodgers. I won a tournament with him in this matchup like 2 weeks ago, but I don't anticipate getting him tonight. The price tag sucks. The matchup sucks. He may or may not suck. I'm not really sure at this point. Like he certainly has upside. He's a highly regarded pitching prospect. So far this year, though, he's only striking out 20.5% of hitters. His stuff plus is down. His pitching plus is down. His velo's down. He really hasn't looked very good outside of that one start against the Dodgers. But either way, Dodgers are really good. Active roster doesn't strike out a lot now that you don't have Chris Taylor sitting on it. Very, very good, obviously, in terms of production. The spot that I think is actually interesting to talk about, and I don't think it's super actionable tonight, but it is something to keep in mind, and I am just kind of interested to see how it goes tonight. Landon Knack at $7,500 here. Very limited sample for him in the majors so far, but he has seemingly improved his changeup. Early returns on it this year are very, very good. Last season, Knack struck out 24.7% of lefties, 23.5% of righties. So a little bit of a higher strikeout percentage against lefties than righties, but he gave up 207 expected ISO to lefties, 192 to righties. Not really extreme splits at all. Small sample this year, but he has struck out 30.5% of the lefties he's faced compared to 16.5% of the righties. Lefties have a 139 expected ISO. Righties are at 247. The thing that actually stands out to me, though, so there's kind of two takeaways here when you consider that it is small sample size this year, and almost guaranteed you're going to have the right-handed numbers get better and the left-handed numbers get worse. It's just a matter of how much. When you combine what he's done this year with what he did last year, I think it's safe to say that right-handed power looks pretty good against Landon Knack, which when you're talking about the Diamondbacks points to Eugenio Suarez in particular. But what stood out was the difference in effectiveness against lefties. And so I wanted to look if I could just figure out what's driving it. Last season, he threw his changeup 22.5% of the time. It only had a 10% swinging strike percentage. This season, he's thrown it 35% of the time to lefties with a 23% swinging strike percentage. So he's almost doubled his changeup usage to lefties, and he's more than doubled his swinging strike percentage on the pitch. Last year, his stuff plus grade for his changeup was 94. So far this year, it's 112. If he can maintain that, he's going to be good against lefties, even if he's not that good against righties. Like his effectiveness against righties is going to depend on his ability to improve his slider, what he's able to do with his slider. If he's able to maintain this changeup, he's going to give lefties a problem. Now, this Diamondbacks lineup against right-handed, or Diamondbacks roster rather, against right-handed pitching this year has the lowest strikeout percentage and the third highest WRC plus. I'm not saying this is the spot where I want to just be like, oh, I'm going to play a bunch of Landon Knack tonight because I figured out that he's been good against lefties so far and he might have a really good changeup. I do want to, kind of put that in the back of my mind for like when he's facing a middle of the road offense that has a bunch of lefties, and maybe I can get him at low ownership then. But it is something where you could downgrade the lefties on the Diamondbacks a little bit. You don't want to go too far with it. Like Corbin Carroll's still going to be really good. Ketel Marte is still really good. Josh Naylor still has a lot of power. You don't want to just not play those guys or anything, but I do think it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. I do think there's a decent chance that lefties on the Diamondbacks are at least a little over projected here, but they're going to look good one way or the other. For the offenses, starting on the Diamondback side, getting 10 to 20% of most of them, of their most relevant guys. Eugenio Suarez would be my highest owned guy here. He's only projected for 8% ownership. I'm getting about 20%. I like that a lot. 364 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year. Knack, even going back to last year, has not been very good at limiting right-handed power. You have one of the best ballparks for hitting home runs. I like Suarez quite a bit. He's also only 4,400. Then I'm getting the Ketel Marte, Josh Naylor, Corbin Carroll, all 13 to 16% of the time. So a bit higher than the field, even though, again, I do have some concerns about the matchup, but they are still good. They're talented. They're relatively low owned. Getting to about 12% Gurriel at 3,500. He hasn't hit for much power, but he is also cheap and probably hitting near the top of the order. Gabby Moreno, same kind of thing. Hasn't hit for a ton of power this year, but he is somebody that in general has shown power in the past. And he's only 3,200 at catcher, so I don't mind getting some of him as well. Not getting too much of Thomas, Perdomo, or Smith. So it's the guys that you would expect to get to from the Diamondbacks. Steven said you'd think there would be some regression on that changeup possible as hitters adjust. Maybe. It's also possible he just has a really good changeup now, especially because he had a changeup last year. It's not like hitters were coming in to their matchup thinking that he's like a fastball curveball guy, and then suddenly he's throwing them changeups. They knew he had a changeup. It's just seemingly a much better one. So regression is possible always, especially when you're talking about a few starts of something, but it is also possible that he just has a nasty changeup now. His stuff plus grade on his changeup so far this year is only 2 points lower than Christopher Sanchez, who has one of the best changeups in baseball. So could certainly see some regression, but it is also possible that he just really improved this pitch. Sports Recap said, do I use uniques for MLB? Not directly. Like, I generally don't end up with that many lineups that only have one or two players different on normal size slates, just because of how my process works out. But I don't generally like click a button saying like one unique, two uniques, anything like that. You could, like, in my more rush, like if I'm, for whatever reason, I don't have time to go through my full process, then yeah, like I'll sim my lineups in Saber Sim, use whatever metric I'm going to use, and then see how many uniques I can use before that metric falls off too much. So like that's a reasonable way to do it. I personally, barring time constraints, don't do it that way. But yeah, the whole idea is just to, for me at least, is to play as many lineups that have a similar expectation as I can, while being as different as possible within them, because that's going to just, mitigate your risk a little bit. But yeah, it really all just kind of depends on your process. I don't specifically like have a min uniques that I use. Like I will have, one or two lineups sometimes that are basically the same except for one or two players. On the Dodgers side, I am getting a ridiculous amount of Shohei Ohtani, which obviously is fine. He's in like 65% of my lineups right now. I never like going that high on a hitter, but if that hitter is Shohei Ohtani, I really don't care. Brandon Pfaadt has not been very good at getting left-handed hitters out so far this season, so far in his career. 196 expected ISO to lefties with a 20% strikeout percentage since last year. 251 expected ISO so far this year. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about Shohei Ohtani being really good. Max Muncy getting 10% ownership at 3,500. I'm getting 17%. Another power left-handed bat. 2x the field on 3K. Michael Conforto. Will Smith, I'm about even with the field at 4,500. He is right-handed, obviously, but he does still have significant power upside. You can look to some Kim for value. If you can afford Freeman and Betts, great. Pajes and some stacks make sense. But to me, Ohtani is the clear priority, followed by Muncy. And then I think Conforto is a pretty interesting value bat as well. So that's every game. I'll recap now. I'll go through position by position. Yeah, if rushing, I don't know what Power's trying to say, but if rushing's in the lineup, that's a good left-handed catcher's bat as well. For pitching, for me, Bubic and Sanchez at the top, followed by Pepio and Ober. For the field, you would have some Castillo up there. You would have some more Sonny Gray up there as well. At catcher, Yainer Diaz, Cal Raleigh, Gabby Moreno. At first base, Shohei Ohtani, Josh Naylor, Christian Walker, Yandy Diaz. At second base, Jorge Polanco, Ketel Marte, Jackson Holliday, and Jonathan India. At third base, Eugenio Suarez, Max Muncy, Yohan Moncada. Shortstop, Zach Neto, Bobby Witt, Jeremy Pena, followed by Gunnar Henderson. Obviously, Trey Turner is a good option there as well. Also, Jose Caballero showing up for me, but I do have some pitch hit risks. And then in the outfield, more Shohei Ohtani, getting to Taylor Ward, getting to Jorge Soler. Again, I think I'm going to end up walking that back at least a little bit. Getting to Carroll, Gurriel, actually paying down a decent amount in the outfield compared to other slates. I didn't mention Harper or Schwarber because, like I said, I'm not getting to the Phillies a ton right now, but clearly those are guys that in general look really good at their respective positions. From a stacking standpoint for me right now, Angels are my most used stack. Again, I think I walked that back some because I don't actually love that matchup. I think I still will be playing them, to be clear. They're underpriced for their upside. They're cheap. I don't want this to come off like JT Ginn is some pitcher that you should be afraid of, but I do think that I'm just like a little bit lower than projections right now. Then I'm getting to the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, the Rays, and the Mariners. Those are all, I think, a lot teams that I like, even though I do have those concerns about Arizona. Steven said, ask ChatGPT, StatCast data reveals that Max changeup in 2025 exhibits approximately 6.7 inches more horizontal movement and 9.2 more vertical movement than 2024. Yeah, that's like an entirely different pitch. So yeah, really interested to see how that plays out. Like, perfect world, I don't know, I have no idea who his next start is against, but like perfect world would be he gets lit up by Arizona tonight, especially if you have Arizona. And then next start, he's facing some like good but not great offense, and he's 6,800 and people are just ignoring him, and you can just like jam him against a bunch of lefties that are not as good as Arizona. Would be like, I think, the perfect world. But Yeah, definitely seems like a new pitch for him. Seems like a significant improvement. So that wraps this one up. Thanks again for checking out the show. If you wanted to see anything in written form, reminder, the deep dive article is on Run the Sims as well. Wrote that earlier today. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff, and good luck on your lineups tonight.